Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to show you how you can implement your own dark mode just by using HTML, JavaScript and CSS. Okay, so what I have on my screen is a couple of little simple forms that I've written for other applications that I've written on my channel, and it's basically just for a Twitch settings screen, right? So nothing too major. What I have done though is I've stripped out all the colors, the colors that I've added to my style sheet. So it used to look like this, right? But I've taken all the colors out and I've just let it use what the defaults are in the browser. Now that's for a simple reason, because the first thing I want to talk about is the idea of a color scheme. And that's where dark mode kind of fits into this, right? So a color scheme is essentially something that's just been implemented into modern browsers. So as of Chrome, it's version 79 and up. So if you've got an older version of Chrome, this will not work. But if you've got a relatively new version, which most of us do, this should work. So the idea is that you can specify a color scheme in your web document and your web page can use that color scheme. Now at the moment, it's basically light or dark mode, right? And you can actually even specify in your document that it could use either one based on the settings of your operating system. Now I'll show you how that works. So what I do is I come over to my head in my HTML document, and I'm going to add a meta tag. I'm going to give it a name of color scheme, and I'm going to give it a content of light space dark. And what this is doing is it's telling the browser that I support both light and dark modes. So if I save this, well, and I refresh, nothing's going to change. And that's because my operating system at the moment is currently in light mode. So I'm on Windows 10. So if you want to change it to dark mode, you have to come into the colors and you can choose the color here from light to dark. And when I click on this, now you can see that the application changed, or the web page, I should say, has changed. It's added a black background, right? So this is really cool, right? This is a new scheme that we've implemented straight out of the gate. Now, you can basically specify this point here and then go and update your CSS and go, okay, based on what given color scheme we've got, we need to apply certain CSS, right? And I'll show you how that works in a second. But the other thing I want to quickly show is that what happens if I get rid of, say, I don't support dark mode, right? So if I save this and I refresh, well, now you can see that regardless of whether I'm in dark mode or not, it's going to always use light mode, right? And even if I switch it back to light mode, you'll see that it stays in light mode. If I switch it back to dark mode, it stays in light mode. And I can do the opposite, right? I can say this is dark and refresh. And now it's dark mode, and I'm still in dark mode on my machine. But if I switch myself to light mode, you can see it always stays in dark mode. So hopefully you get the idea of how that works, okay? Now I've declared this color scheme in my document, and that's okay if you want to basically only ever have one portion or the whole portion of your page implement either one theme or the other, right? But what if you wanted to, say, style your page differently based on two different color schemes, right? Can you do that? And the answer is yes, you can. So we can say that in our style sheet, by default, by using the root, we can come in and say, all right, I'm going to set the color scheme to use just light or dark, right? When we do that, we're saying, okay, cool, we can support either light or dark. So if I save this, you can see it goes back to light mode because I'm in light mode. And ultimately, if I switch, it supports dark mode, right? But what if we said, regardless of what type of scheme we're in, we always want to render these inputs and this button as if it's in light mode, right? Can we do that? The answer is yes. If I find the form where these fields reside. So in my selectors, it's basically my group form, right? If I apply a color scheme to this and say, look, I only ever want it to be in light mode, right? So this is not saying implement certain properties when it's in light mode. This is saying I want this group form always to apply the light mode scheme, color scheme. If I now refresh, well, now you can see that the inputs and the button are behaving as if the page is in the light mode scheme. Cool. So that's one way of handling schemes, right? And you can actually go one step further. You could, say for the inputs. So let's go for the group form body. So that will exclude this button here, right? If I set this color scheme and say, you know what, I actually made a mistake. I want everything to go back to dark mode, for example, then the inputs will go back into dark mode, but the button will remain in light mode, right? So you can do that kind of cascading, just like with any other kind of style sheet. Now, this is nice and everything, but obviously it's very limited, right? So the only things that really change when we switch it between light and dark mode is the color of the text, the background color, and the inputs, right? They've changed color a little bit. So what we really want to do is continue to style more of the page based on the color scheme, right? So we want basically for light mode for it to look like this, okay? So that's where we're going to start. So I'm going to remove this example that we have here because we don't need it anymore. That was just to demonstrate color schemes. And I'm going to open up another example. So original CSS. Now, if I look at the original file, so just let me bring that across. I've set the meta tag color scheme here to either light or dark. So at the moment, I'm in light, or it's showing light, even though I'm in dark mode. All right, so we haven't handled setting up the CSS for whether it's in dark mode or not. So when I switch to light mode, the only thing that's going to change is this top bit. If I switch back to dark mode, then the only thing that's going to change is the top bit again, right? So it's not actually switching the styling of the page based on whether we're in dark mode or not. Now, that's because if I come over to my CSS, I've specified a bunch of variables for basic styling of the page and then variables specific to light mode, right? So they're now currently running throughout the style sheet, and that's what you're seeing on screen here, right? But when I switch it to dark mode, I do have a set of CSS or variables that I've got defined here, but I'm not sure where to apply them yet because we haven't learned one thing, and that is the idea of a preference, right? So in the CSS world, we have what's referred to as a prefers color scheme, which is essentially our preference, right? So when I switched it between dark mode and light mode, we're changing the preference. So how we can detect that in the CSS file specifically is via a media query. So if I come down to here and I go add media, and inside this media query, I go prefers color scheme. And because we want to detect dark mode in this situation, we type the word dark. And then we can take from our root, right, we can apply those rules. And I forgot the colon there. I thought I missed something. Not the colon at the end, the colon at the beginning. And now what I can do is I can take these CSS rules and I can apply them into here. So when we're in dark mode, these colors will now get updated to reflect these new values. So I'm just going to bring this comment down to reflect this is dark mode. And I'm going to save this. And when I refresh, because my application is, or sorry, my operating system is already in dark mode, you can see now it reflects dark mode. If I come over and I switch it back to light mode, well, you can see it's now using light mode. So this media query is detecting when I change the color scheme on my operating system, which is fantastic, right? Now, obviously, I can switch this to light as well. So if I do that, it's going to do something a little bit weird. It's going to apply light mode, or sorry, dark mode when it's still in light mode, and you'll actually never get light mode. but you get the point, right? So the idea is that we can change the colors of our application simply based on the preferred, or based on the preferences of our operating system. Cool. So that's another way that we can handle skinning our application or based on light and dark mode. But there's one more, and that is that we might want to change the preferences of the theme based on JavaScript and storing it in an external location, kind of like either a database or, in the example I'm about to show you, local storage. So with the power of video editing, you can see now in the bottom right hand corner, I brought a new feature into display, and that is a little slider control that allows me to toggle between dark and light mode. So at the moment, it doesn't really do anything except just slide back and forth, and it doesn't update the styling of the page at all, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my CSS. I'm actually going to remove this preferred color scheme media query because we're going to utilize that in our JavaScript code. So I'm going to basically cut out what we have here, or basically bring all this out, cut that out, and I'm going to convert this media query to a class that I'm going to apply to the body element. All right, so down here, I'm going to go body, and I'm going to say dark mode, like so, and then I'm going to paste it in there. So I'm going to get rid of the root bit, so I'll just grab the variables and do this, right? So now I've saved it here. If I refresh the page, well, you're not going to see any difference yet. But if I come over to my HTML and I apply a class here of dark mode, like so, and save and refresh, now you can see it actually applies that dark mode theme, okay? And it'll remain that way until I get rid of the class. So we're going to add that class dynamically in our JavaScript code. Cool. So I'm going to take that away, and we're just going to stay with light mode to begin with. Cool. Now, I have an extra file here called theme.js. I'll quickly explain what's in here. So basically, I have a set of functions. One is to toggle the state of the button, which we won't be changing. So that's this logic down here. I'm just going to leave that as is. We're never going to come in here. That's the way it is. We have a variable which I'm just keeping on the window object at the moment. This is just vanilla JavaScript. Doesn't have to be perfect, but there's a let variable that toggles the state of is dark mode when we handle the slider toggle, right? Which is why we're able to change the state of the toggle. I also have a wire up slide toggle function, which just adds a click event on that slide toggle, which ultimately calls handle slide toggle, which does what we need to do to toggle the state of the thing. So all of it's around the toggle so far. And then we just wire that up at the end of the script here. That script is referenced at the bottom of the file at the just before the end body tag. So that's how it's all set up at the moment. So the first thing we really want to do is we want to change the state of the theme based on what we press down here. Okay, so let's go about doing that. So I'm just going to close these other two files because we don't really need them anymore. And the first thing I'm going to do is wire up the rest of that toggle button, right? So what we really need to do is we need to update that body element. So I'm going to create a function. I'm going to call it update app interface, right? So we'll just put it up here. Function update app interface. And what this is going to do is it's going to toggle that dark mode class on that body element, right? So I'm just going to grab a snippet of code that makes it easiest for us to just quickly look at it. So what I'm doing first is if it already had dark mode enabled on it, I'm just removing it, right? So that's if it was previously dark mode, it turns it off. If it's turning it back on, then it will just re-add it, right? So it's adding that dark mode class. I'm then going to basically call this function whenever I handle the slide toggle, right? And after I've changed the is dark state. So just before updating the toggle button, I'm just going to put the function call in there. So now if I refresh, you can see that says dark mode is no. If I click on the button, now you can see that the theme is changing, right? Because we've added that class. Now, if we want to have a quick look at what it's doing in the elements, so if I make this a little bit bigger, you'll ultimately see that the body has the class dark mode on it, right? And if I scroll down and I click on the dark mode thing, you can see it goes away, it comes back, and so on and so forth, right? It's a really simple logic there, not much to worry about. Now that's great. That works while we're on the screen. So as we see at the moment, we're in dark mode on our operating system, but when I refresh, we can see it goes back to light mode. And in fact, it says no as well. There's a few things we need to change here. One is the current state of the page when we're in dark mode. So when we refresh, when it first loads, we want to make sure that we detect, oh, we're in dark mode, we should be showing dark mode. We also want to change the state of this button when that's the case as well. So I'm just going to bring this back over so it's more back into the middle of the screen, like so. So we need to do both those things. So how do we go about doing that? Well, I don't know if anyone has heard of this before, but there is a special object on the window object called match media. And this kind of acts like the JavaScript version of a media query, right? If this exists, then you'll be able to do this. If it doesn't exist, then you won't be able to do this. That's the important thing to understand here. Now, most modern browsers do have a match media object on the window, but I always like to check anyway to make sure that the presence of it is there. And if that's the case, then I can run a similar media query to what I did in the CSS. So it looks a little bit like this, right? So now we're saying we're going to check for if it matches the color scheme of dark mode, right? So we know by default we're going to get light mode, so we're going to check for the presence of dark mode. If this happens, right? So if we happen to get into a situation where this happens, then I'm going to toggle the state of is dark mode to the matches value. So matches will be true if this is true, right? If this is not true, then this will be false, which means is dark mode will be false. In that situation, I'm then going to wire up the slide toggle, like so, just after that. And then I'm also, well, actually, I'm going to leave wire up slide toggle outside of here. And I'm going to call something called toggle theme. All right. So toggle theme is a function I haven't written yet, but what it will do is it will update both the button and the visual interface, right? So the other one, it's kind of like this handle slide toggle function, but not quite. So it'll look like the following. Function, toggle theme. Cool. Now, for the moment, we're just going to be calling these two functions. That's it. Toggle button and update interface. Because we're already setting that is dark mode down here. Right, so we're not going to be worrying about changing that. That's going to basically toggle theme, which is going to basically do these two things. Cool. So that's what I'm going to put there for the minute. If I save this and I refresh, now you can see that it goes into dark mode, right? And you can see it's applied the yes state down here. So that's because it's detected the prefers color scheme of dark and set is dark mode to matches to be true. If I now come in and change it to light mode, which you'll notice it doesn't change the app just yet. We'll get to that in a moment, right? If I now refresh the page, now you'll see it will stay in light mode, and is dark mode down here will be set to no. Right, and if I toggle back and forth, it will detect that because we're detecting it via the button, right? But if I try to change it down here, as I showed before, whoops, not custom, dark, you'll see that doesn't change. Okay. Now, let's deal with the fact that this doesn't update when I change this, right? So if I toggle back and forth between here, you can see that dark mode and light mode do not change. So not only do we need to detect the change when we initially load the page, we need to listen for when this has changed, right? We're not doing that in our JavaScript at the moment. So there's a special function that we can fire onto on that MQL object that looks like this. So it's called change. And this is basically what we do. So on that media query, we're checking for a change in this media query rule. So if it changes, like first it's checking for dark. If it happens to change to light, it will fire up a change event, right? And in that situation, then it will check to see if we're detecting light mode or not. If this is false, this will be false, and then we're retoggling the theme, right? If it change it back to black, and I've just realized that's fine. Don't need that. If I change this back to dark mode, then this will be true, and then it'll toggle the theme back to dark mode, and vice versa, right? So if I now add this in and save, well, you can see it's detected dark mode out of the box, which is fine. And now if I toggle this to light mode, now you can see that the application instantly went into light mode because I added that event listener. If I toggle it back to dark, well, you can see it toggles back to dark mode because of that event listener. So that, for the most part, is the major bit that we needed to implement in terms of getting it to react to your operating system. But what if we wanted to change our application just a little bit more so that it only uses this as preferences for the first time the application arrives, or until we change the value down here, right? So if we come to the website for the first time, it reads the value here, and then basically when we touch on this, right, it puts this some value somewhere else, right? So when we refresh, it should stay in dark mode rather than reading the preferences over here, okay? So I'm going to show you how to do that using local storage, but you could use lots of different mechanisms to do this. But this is just the code that I've written to achieve this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the top of the file, and I'm just going to add a local storage key. So I'm just going to go const dark mode preferences key. And I'm just going to set it to some value. Whoops, not Daryl. Dark mode example preferences. And that's what it will be called inside of local storage, right? This will be the name. The next thing I want to do is I want to basically save a value when I toggle this button. So I'm going to come down to where I have handle slide toggle. And just after I toggle the dark mode value, I'm going to call a function called save theme to local storage, like so. I'm then going to create this function, right? I'm going to create this function. I'm going to come down a bit. Let's say I'll just do it actually directly underneath. I'm going to function, save theme to local storage. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically call local storage, and then I call set item, I think. Yep, let's go dark mode preferences for the key. And then so I'm going to go JSON.stringify. So I'm going to store it as JSON because local storage requires you to put string in it. And I'm going to pass in an object which will basically have is dark mode set. All right, so that's the global variable that we're using. And that's all I'm going to do for the minute. And if I refresh, well, if I open up the application part at the very bottom here, so that would be not this bit, but over in this tab, I go application. I don't have any keys at the moment, but if I come down and I toggle this dark mode, now you can see that we have the key and is dark mode set to true because we're in dark mode, right? Now, if I refresh, it's not going to honor it because we haven't written the code to do that yet, but you can still see it says true. It'll say true when I toggle it like that, and if I set it again, it'll set it to false. So we know that we're setting the value correctly in local storage. Cool. Now I need a function to retrieve that, so I'm just going to quickly write one of those. So this will be a little bit more complicated. So function, then I go get theme from local storage. And what this will do is I go const preferences as a JSON equals local storage dot get item. I'm going to call that dark mode reference key. Then I'm going to say if this doesn't exist, because it's possible it doesn't exist the first time we do something. All right, so if this doesn't exist, then we're going to return undefined. All right, so it means that there was no preferences or there's no theme. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to return JSON.parse of preferences JSON. If for whatever reason we can't parse it, then I'm going to catch, and I'm just going to return undefined for now. All right, so that's just how I'm going to retrieve the theme from our local storage. Cool, so that's that written and ready to go. So I'm just going to close that up. I'm going to close this up. And now that we're saving to local storage, we need to be able to retrieve it when we first start, right? So when we first start, we want to detect if it exists or not. So we could do this in toggle theme because that's used when we change, when either the theme changes and we don't want it to overwrite the current theme. So toggle theme seems to be the right place to see if we have a value in that local storage, right? Because we want it to not be overwritten when we change it here in the settings. And we want it to load the first time, which is here, right? And in fact, I'd almost go as far as this here should be down here. Okay, so in toggle theme, I'm just going to basically capture what the current value of is dark mode is by fetching it from local storage. So I go const local theme equals get theme from local storage. And then I'm going to go is dark mode is equal to if the local theme, right, it actually has one, is dark mode. So if this is undefined, then this will be undefined. So if it is undefined, or sorry, it is defined, we're going to use it. Otherwise, we're just going to use the current value of is dark mode. And hopefully that makes sense. So we're saying if local storage didn't have a theme in it, or it does have a theme in it, right, we're going to use this value that's stored in the local storage. Otherwise, we're going to use the one that's globally defined at the top here, which by the time it gets to this function, should already be set by all these other things down here. Cool. So if I now save this, and I'm going to clear this key for a second, and I'm just going to close it. If I refresh now, obviously we're in light mode because our application's in light mode. If I switch it over to dark mode, you can see it's still on this dark mode for the moment. I'm now going to actually manually click this into light mode. All right. So now when I refresh, well, it's still in the dark mode. Interesting. So that shouldn't have happened. Oh, actually, no, that shouldn't have happened. That should now be light mode. So that means we've got a bug here. What is the bug? Is dark mode equal local theme dark mode? Okay, interesting. Just give me a second and I will work this out. Okay, and I sorted it out. It was just my mistake, a little bit of JavaScript error. Here, I had a double pipe instead of double question mark, which checks for nullable. So what was happening here is this was evaluating to false, and then it was just using whatever this value was, which was always whatever the current value was before it got here, right? Bit hard to explain, but basically this needed to be a null check or an undefined check, so I had to use double equals, not double pipe. So it's just a bit of a JavaScript issue there. But now that I've done that, you can see that we're in light mode, and you can see it's toggled to none down here. So my OS is currently in dark mode, but the preferences have been stored for light mode regardless, right? So if I now switch to dark mode here, you can see I can refresh it. If I switch this to light mode, like so, it stays in dark mode. If I refresh the page, well, it stays in dark mode. Now, if I open up my application tab and remove that session storage key, so now I don't have any stored preferences, and I refresh, now you can see it's in light mode, and it will stay that way, right, as long as I don't add it back to session storage, which I just did then, right? So as long as I don't toggle that thing at the bottom, and I refresh, then it will honor whatever I've got over here, right? Cool. So that is how you can now create your own dark and light theme for your application or website by using vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell. And I'll see you all next time.